episode of Maps Are Dead with Mike D. Excited you're here today. We've got Destry Wardle back with us for another episode. Destry is the chief of staff at the Dauphinee Group. And long before that, she was a trained therapist. I like to call her the sister voice in my head. By the end of this one, you'll kind of know why. She and I are going to talk about why many times in order to go forward, you got to go backwards. We're going to talk about things that we did to survive our childhood and what happens when we're still doing those things when we're 40. And I'm actually going to probably share a little bit of my story that I don't normally share. I hope you really get something out of this one. I think you're going to like it. Let's dive in. This is a podcast, live conversations, not scripted, not preset, but all about trying to figure out, in a world that's kind of run off the map when we're going new places, both personally, professionally in the world, how do you develop your own compass to navigate when no one else can tell you what to do? These are conversations with all kinds of folks in different settings, and I'm excited to have back today one of my coaches / chief of staff / good friends, sister voice in my head, Destry Wardle. Thank you so much, Destry, for making time for me today.
Oh, it's so good to be here. I love these conversations.
It's going to be fun. I think we're more and more, I keep going, I should try and find all these different, we're obviously looking for guests all the time. And so if you ever have suggestions, if you're following on your home, we're always looking for guests. But more and more, I want to have conversations that are real about things. And we always end up talking a lot about our clients and our team and kind of those conversations. And I wanted to have this conversation today with you is, Destry, you were, as I mentioned before in our previous conversation, so you're a trained therapist. You trained as a therapist in the early days before kind of working with us. You work as a coach now. You also do, but you do all kinds of other therapeutic modalities and things. People, I know you've made that shift. We talked a little bit about you shifting into working with us as a coaching company and a coaching team. When people ask you, though, the difference between therapy and coaching, what is the description or the delineator that you often find yourself offering them when they want to know what is the difference between a therapist and a coach?
Yeah, that's a question and a question that comes up a lot. My definition of that in the work that I do in the therapeutic space is really the journey of, we call it the journey of descent. It's to look back and to see the different places in our life where there may have been ruptures or, trauma that happened in our story that left us either underdeveloped or, kind of a part of us gets frozen in time. We have ungrieved losses in that. And the way that we began to navigate survival, so to speak, through those different experiences kind of set us up in a way that, while it worked for us to, they were behaviors and ways of being that were helpful for our survival through those circumstances, they become problematic in our present. And so the journey, therapeutic journey is really kind of understanding our story. It's going back into places where we were never allowed to or never had the opportunity to grieve, and doing it with a person, I kind of hold that space of what we call an empathic witness. There's parts of our stories that need witnessed in order to be, kind of integrated into our whole self now. As well as looking at what are the different behaviors that came out of some of those either traumatic experiences or unmet needs that kind of happened along the way. So it's a lot of looking back for the purpose of integration and healing. The thing that where I talk about coaching, I think coaching goes more forward. It's not ignoring those things, but it's allowing those things, the awareness of those things, then to create a partnership with your coach to help a more empowered way of living. So I know this about myself. I know that my default mechanism is to, isolate, to hide, to self-protect in a way that is counterintuitive to the vision that I have or the movement I want to make in my life. And so my coach
Yeah.
is, or when I'm coaching, I'm helping people address those things, create some accountability around those things, and some intention of how to, move in a different direction, how to move beyond that behavior, again, that was once helpful and no longer is. So coaching is much more
Yeah.
about looking forward, moving forward. Um, and I like the integration of both of those journeys coming together, which is kind of, what falls under that title of therapeutic coaching.
So that was a way more clear answer because my brain, I always like dump it into buckets. You know how I am. I'm like, okay, a therapist helps you make sense of your past. A coach is trying to help you apply wherever you are to your future. And I'll often say that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out. But if you don't know why you have parts that are not integrated, if you don't know why you have certain drives, if you don't know what's driving that, hey, you probably should get a therapist to figure that out. And then we can go forward. Because as a coach, for many years, I have referred people to therapy as part of our work. Because when we go, at the Dauphinee Group, we say, know your strengths, set a vision, face your fears, take courageous action. They can have great plans and great visions and ideas and not understand why it is they don't follow through on them. They don't really understand why it's difficult to do the thing they say they want to do. They don't understand the gap. And we can keep giving them frameworks, but I'll realize that, you know what, there's actually some things that are both emotional, like there's stress. And for me, I remember one time having a coach ask me something and he's like, how would you do that? And I remember he was asking me about how I was going to deal with solving a problem. There was something about specifically finding new clients or new contacts or something. And I remember him saying, well, how might you do that? And I said, well, I have no idea. He's like, well, close your eyes right now. What do you see in your head? And I remember thinking, if I close my eyes right now, I just see a blank wall. And it was funny. My brain could not, for some reason, legitimately, I would visualize a blank wall. And he's like, you might want to unpack why it is your mind can't even dream of something there, like what that looks like. And I was like, that's an interesting space where we're like, we actually hit these blank walls or we actually feel like we're being compelled and we're being driven by something else. And if you don't have vocabulary for that, which is what I hope therapy often provides, I think then it gets in the way of the planning and action, the vision, the settings, the practices towards a goal that you're trying to set up in your coaching. And so I feel like that, I always say this is why coaching and therapy work together. So I'm always jealous of people who get to work with you because they're kind of dealing with someone who can operate on both sides of their brain, which is true for all of us, right? But it's this idea of your ability to go, I'm going to hold space for in very therapeutic words, hold space for whatever you're bringing to the table while simultaneously saying one doesn't have to be healed, fixed, or whatever somebody's term would be before they can move forward. And I think that's a big component is so many people will wait to kind of I've got to be healed and fixed. And they always will be fixed is their quote in therapy before I take new action. And that's not how life works. Would you agree that, it's not a requirement of one is done, therapy's finished. Now we go to coaching. It's not how that works.
Oh, no. I wish it worked like that. That would be so great. It would work
Progression
really
all
well
the time. That'd be beautiful.
for my natural way of being. No, I think we're always on a journey of integration, of, moving towards wholeness. And I think the coaching process, even for me, the coaching process, I've been doing therapy, whether I've received it or whether I've been doing it for a long time. And even my entry into coaching revealed certain things about myself that I was like, oh man, I had no idea that I was being driven so much by this, particular self-protection, behavior. And then as I looked under that, where's the root of that? I can go back into my story. The good thing is therapy kind of gives that space where you start to engage your story, you start to kind of go. A lot of people are so afraid of their story, and their story, because it's so filled with different, you know, traumatic moments, it's very fragmented. And so in therapy, you're kind of collecting those pieces and creating a good narrative that we can always go back to in the coaching process and see, oh, okay, this is where the root of that is. Now, the awareness of that is not that's a big part of it, just being able to name what is true, to name what actually happened. But we also need to grieve that. And when we have ungrieved losses, I really think there is a part of us that stays stuck in that place. And that's why in the coaching journey, we hit these barriers or these roadblocks where we can't just, believe our way into the next thing, or we can't,
Yeah.
commit our way into the next thing, because I think there's this part of us that no way, I want to be, there's maybe a younger part of us that's like, I demand to be heard. I want to hear, I want somebody to hear what I experienced there. So that to me is the ebb and flow of, therapy and coaching.
Yeah. Because I think it is
Understanding for the
really,
purpose of moving forward.
yeah, understanding for the purpose of moving forward is the headline, I think. And if people really do understand, they can say, yep, warts and all, imperfections and all, things I'm still working out. I understand now that this is what I'm bringing forward with me. And here's
Yeah,
the consequences, right? Let's
right.
say I come from a place where I grew up in a world where it was always warm. And so I actually don't own winter coats. And so, but I do own a lot of sunscreen. Now, the fact that I'm actually moving to Alaska, metaphorically speaking,
Yeah,
my sunscreen from my childhood isn't going to help me much in a place that requires, multiple layers and thermal underwear.
yeah,
And I think
yeah,
what we can do is we can be frustrated though, saying, well, this worked for me. These survival tools that kept me healthy here in my childhood, why aren't they working now today? And I think that's
yeah.
part of there's a couple different components that I think are super important that I love in this space as we really do get to good work is that, we work with individuals, but also companies. We're dealing with people
Mhm.
on everything from how to build a laboratory, to do actual commercial construction of labs, to financial advisory, to athletes, to think tanks and startups. So it's not just people are often thinking about, well, I need to know how to lead my team to do the work. And it's always
Mhm.
fascinating to watch who they are, surprise them when that who they are on the inside and the story of their childhood and their life show up at their job. Like understanding how that plays out and how I think a good word for it is really understanding our story. Is that understanding the story that we tell ourselves and the story we're committed to? One of the things that's really interesting to me is someone said to me one time, I've learned that before my life was pushed along by my past, and I'm trying to figure out how to be moved along by my future. And so it was
Mm,
like the idea when you ask people about their lives, they're like, well, my dad was a military brat. I moved around a lot. Da 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 da. Therefore, I'm very introverted. Like they'll tell you the background of their life, their story to
yeah,
explain why they do or don't do something now. But it's funny, and so this coach was saying to me, it's interesting how your story is always driving you forward, but you never ever think about future me would like me to do this today and pull me along.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think that there is, I'm telling my clients a lot that you are responding now what the, younger you needed to respond to in the context where you were helpless
Yes.
to do anything different. But you're
Yeah.
no longer in that place. You're not there. So what does it look like to take back some agency and some ownership and to try a different way of being that is more aligned with who you want to be and where you want to go. The other thing that I think is important too that you know, I'll use this example a lot. I don't know if you remember the game Shoots and Ladders, but
Yeah.
we want to make this journey a journey of shoots and ladders. We want to land if I could just get to this spot, then I can bypass the emotional work that needs to happen to move me towards healing.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's not a game of shoots and ladders. There are places in our story that need to be, I'll use the term, we have to feel to heal.
Mm.
And we can't get a free pass on the appropriate amount of grieving that needs to happen for the losses that have occurred over time. And when we don't heal, when we don't allow ourselves to feel, that emotional energy just gets put into kind of a pressure cooker, right? And at some
Yeah.
point, that thing's going to blow. And if you don't allow those feelings to come up and out in a healthy way, feelings buried alive never die. They will find
Mm.
their way out sideways,
Yeah.
and that's
True.
where we start to have a lot of difficulty in relationships, in our workplaces, because all this emotional energy that has not been allowed to come up and out in the way that it needs to is
Hmm.
now spilling out around us. And
Yeah.
it's it's inhibiting us, it's impacting, it's keeping us from moving forward into the things that we really desire and the things we were really built for and made for.
Hmm. I think I heard somebody say one time in a workshop I was doing in Atlanta, none of us were formed away from people. If we exist with parents in various settings and caretakers and, villains and victims and heroes and all those things that come in stories, I guess. We've developed our lives and the stories and our coping mechanisms in relationship. But
Yeah.
what can be interesting is how often I meet leaders, and I see it in myself even, in our
Hmm.
modern context, that really wanna fix ourselves alone.
Absolutely.
We
Yeah.
wanna heal ourselves by ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think a big thing is to realize that putting the pieces together well, healing things, reconceiving things, growing and maturing, none of it has ever occurred in isolation and in this bubble by ourselves. But yet, anything we're ashamed of or we see as, you know, fancy word, maladaptive,
Hmm.
we often want to fix it alone. And I think because we haven't had that peerage of people around us that go, hey, look, we're all funny looking. We're all struggling. And so we try to do this by ourselves and wonder why it doesn't work. And that was,
Yeah.
for me, my first time having therapy ever. Like I was working right after college, I was working in juvenile drug rehab for convicted juvenile felons outside of San Jose, California. And they had counseling programs within their system for our staff, things like that, and even externally for the community. And we were offered free counseling in that space. And I remember suddenly realizing the freedom of having somebody who was contractually bound to never tell my secrets and also had no ulterior motive. That was the big thing for me, was that the first time I ever heard, I remember a therapist saying, well, that sounded like you were struggling or that was hard. And that sounded painful, I remember. And I remember going like, what's their ulterior motive? Only to realize that my therapist had no ulterior motive. But how much I
Mm.
would discount words of affirmation or encouragement or support from others, because in my mind, they had some kind of motive attached to that. And so to suddenly
Yeah.
have somebody clinically and professionally trained to go, I have nothing but your well being. I'm not going to bring shame to the conversation. And you don't have to sit and process your story by yourself. That was a pretty transformational experience for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I really believe that what gets broken or wounded in relationship needs healed in the context of
Mhm.
a relationship. We can't do that in isolation. And the unfortunate part is our culture sells a different story, right? We can
Yeah.
perform our way into healing. We can, self, just depend on yourself. Nobody else is going to be there for you. And so we buy into that narrative and, we set off on that journey and it is lonely and it causes us that loneliness then causes us to
Yeah.
act in all kinds of different ways of trying to fill that void with whatever your drug of choice is.
Yeah.
We have an internal need and desire to belong, And
Yeah.
when we have been wounded, or had experienced betrayal or ruptures in relationship, it's natural to draw back.
Mhm.
Um, but we can't stay there, and we can't stay
Yeah.
there and move forward in the ways that are really going to bring, um, wholeness, joy,
Yeah.
satisfaction, all those kinds of things.
It's
So yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right in the fact that our culture and our independence and our individualistic nature sells us the story of, hey, be unique and special. You're right. Everything from
Mhm.
your own personal brand to whatever these things are. We're driven to particularize ourselves, separate ourselves out, and make ourselves unique in that space.
Yeah.
And the idea of having to go, wait, I need that relationship. I think you're right. It's a big shift for some of us, and I think a lot too about. It's so funny. People will say, in fact, we hear it all the time when we do our coach or our team sessions. Clients will laugh and say, "Oh yeah, it's coaching therapy," and because
Mhm.
they're new, especially if they're new to coaching, they call it, "Oh, it's the
Uh-huh.
therapy call," and they don't, and they're not working with therapeutic coaches. They're just having coaching in our
Yeah.
style, which is we do a real mix of vision specific and pragmatic transformational coaching. So we want you to grow and develop the inside compass in yourself while delivering on a result. So what's fascinating is, but as soon as you have any conversation about how they felt, which is part of the conversation of what's holding you back, we always say
Mhm.
leverage your Clifton strengths to step into the gap between your vision and your reality. For them, that feels like therapy, which tells me how little people step into the metacognition, right? Daniel Pink right now on LinkedIn is having these conversations about how the highest form of thinking is the ability to think about how
Yeah.
you're thinking. And there's a lot
Yeah.
of great research on how people find clarity. And I think it was some psychiatrist work and neurological work where suddenly be able to label the words, oh, I'm actually feeling anxious. The ability to think and properly label our thinking, oh, that's
Uh-huh.
anxious thinking,
Uh-huh.
suddenly was a kind of increased health. It increased neuroregulation and emotional regulation, the ability to and so so many coaching clients, so many times like, oh, you're like a team, you're like a therapist. And I'm like, actually, no, I'm not. But you just have so little experience having conversations that include you thinking about how your emotional being shows up in this seemingly logical business decision.
Absolutely. I think, one of the big deficits in our, human cohort is the lack of emotional intelligence, the lack of emotional awareness. I think it was Brene Brown, in her research, her early research said, when you ask people to give, three feelings that they could identify as experiences they have on a regular basis, the amount of words that they had were 3 to 5 words was the average, which is crazy that's,
Right.
and I can even attest to that at the beginning of my journey, I could tell you I was happy, I was sad, or I was hungry. Those were 3 feelings I could identify. And so some of the biggest work is just becoming more aware of the language of emotion,
Sure.
and before we can't express emotion if we don't have the language of emotion. And so a lot of, my work with people in that therapeutic space is giving them the opportunity to pause, to look inward, and to name what it is that I'm actually feeling, and how is that feeling, driving the story.
Yeah.
Feelings give you really important information. They aren't always telling you what's true, but they are
Mhm.
telling you where there's something off. I always it's like, the smoke alarm in the house, or it's the check engine light on
Yeah.
your dashboard of, hey, something is off here. And it's an invitation to go discover where that's coming from. So, part of that feelings vocabulary, it also leads you to become aware of what are some of the unbearable feelings in your life. And
Yeah.
those emotions that we've really oriented much of our life around avoiding. And those things are usually tied to earlier traumas, very
Yeah.
formational times in your life where you either didn't get what you need or you got what you didn't need, and it shaped an experience that, you know, added to the way you see yourself, the way you see others, the way you see the world. And it's part of that experience. So if my unbearable feeling is rejection, that's rooted in, you know, the fact that I had two
Yeah.
dads walk out on me,
Mhm.
then much of my life gets oriented around the avoidance of
Of that.
rejection. And you can see what that would cost me, right? Like if I walk around just doing everything, playing safe all the time, which was my, you know, I would like fly below the radar, you know, don't put
Yeah.
yourself out there and you won't be rejected. Number one, that doesn't work. And number two, it really makes my life pretty small. I'm missing a lot of opportunities that is rejection a possibility? For sure. I can't
Right.
avoid rejection. So part of the coaching part of the journey is, how do I now allow myself to experience rejection and know I'm not that helpless little girl that's sitting
Yeah.
there, you know, she's there with me, and I can turn towards that part of me and be like, you're okay. These people can reject you, and it doesn't mean that you're bad or you're
Mhm.
damaged, or, you know, people might not
Yeah.
like you, and that's okay. You can grieve that and you can move forward and find people that do empower you, encourage you, welcome you in. And so part of
Yeah.
that coaching journey for me has been to find my way to sit with the emotion and not, you know, and find, you know, how do I allow that to be an embodied experience that I'm not, you know, like a deer in headlights trying to, you know, navigate my way around not
Mhm.
feeling. Um,
Yeah.
and how do I approach that with more empowerment, with more
Yeah.
intention, with being anchored in what my truth is, not in what the feeling's trying to tell me.
Yeah. Because that one of I love what you're saying in that I feel like it kind of fits with everything we do. In my book Extraordinary, I think I had quotes before each chapter. At the time when I was writing, that's what you did. You put quotes before each chapter. And one of the quotes was, "The beginning of wisdom is to call things by their right name." It's a
Mhm.
very ancient saying. The beginning of wisdom was to call things by their right name. And for me, I believe that's why I'm so driven for us as a team to use Clifton Strengths. It's this
Yeah.
idea of it begins to strengths. There's no magic. You take Clifton Strengths as an assessment and a tool. There's no magic to it. In fact, there's something very off if it tells you things you did not know. It
Yeah.
typically it just simply puts language to thought, feeling, and behavior in the midst of that. And what I find powerful is the midst of there's a version of this that occurs at the same time with therapy. Not that you have to use therapeutic tools, not that you're using therapeutic labels, and even like we're using so a little bit of therapy coach speak at times, and even our conversation right now, but that the ability to put words and vocabulary to our experiences, our feelings, our memories ends up being really important. I remember after I had some post-traumatic stress stuff come back. I had post-traumatic stress after my work in Afghanistan. It was between 2017 and 2019. Worked with a therapist on that and some things. And then after Afghanistan evacuations in 2021, that brought all that back in 7 days of working around the clock for evacuations. And I remember my therapist, Pam, handing me a feelings and need sheet. And she's like,
Mhm.
hey, and there was like 50 words on one. I think it came out of I think the material is it's a weird name, but nonviolent communication, I think
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
the source material for some of that. And my homework was every 3 days was to pick one or two of the feelings off the feelings
Mhm.
sheet and pick then what I felt like the need that was missing, something a need that wasn't being met, which was driving the feeling off the other sheet. And for
Yeah.
me in that state, I remember 2 or 3 sessions where the only feeling that came up was numb, and I couldn't tell you the need why. Like
Mm.
that's how I knew I needed the work was that,
Mhm.
but over time, as unpacking, well, when have I ever felt this again? What
Mhm.
about it is numb? Is all of me numb? Are pieces of me numb? Like it started with the very first word. It's simple. The word numb doesn't describe a lot. But realizing that what happens is, I knew a therapist, a coach one time who used to say, healthy people ask for what they want.
Mhm.
Healthy
Mhm.
people ask for what they want. And I will often say the problem is most of us don't have language to describe what we want. We're often like
Yeah.
2-year-olds. The magic of a 2-year-old is they're suddenly aware of themselves and they have wants and needs, but no, they don't have vocabulary yet to ask specifically. And so sometimes we get it right and give the 2-year-old the right thing. Sometimes we don't. And so without the words, I was telling someone the other day, I feel like we try to solve the wrong problems. We try to
Mhm.
fix our feelings. And like you said, feelings are simply information. They aren't,
Mhm.
they, they're simply feedback. They aren't something to be fixed. They're simply telling us something about the situation in which we find ourselves and the ways in which our brains and limbic systems are reacting to that. And the
Yeah.
vocabulary in that space of going, what if we had some words? What if we
Mhm.
had so much, which I think, and I want to lead this into this part because for the first time recently, I'm starting to hit this window in the last 6 months. I have suddenly had more people ask me and say, but Mike, do you really know anybody who ever gets healthy on therapy? Like all of a sudden therapy started picking up and they're kind of going, but really, does it really work? And there's a little bit of oh, it's like going to the chiropractor. Once you go, you'll never stop going kind of a thing. Or
Mhm.
therapists are there to keep you talking and those kind of places. And so more and more, and again, you and I are in fact, we know people that do this clinically, where we have doctors that work with ketamine and psilocybin and things like that. More people are, interestingly enough, going, well, shouldn't they just go to those retreats? Let's just go find a psilocybin practitioner. Let's just go find a ketamine practitioner. Won't that be better? I mean, because people ever get better from therapy?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and this is the conversation. What I find fascinating is I'm like, you're going to have a conversation with somebody. It might just be the thing in your head instead of a therapist. But at the same time, I've actually heard somebody, I know people that have been practitioners of this and they're like, Mike, you know, what's interesting? It was incredibly transformational for me. But if I didn't work out my discoveries and my ahas in that therapy in my life with people consistently, I reverted within 18 months. Like the
Mm.
fears and anxieties came back, and that it wasn't a replacement for going, I still have
Mhm.
to use this understanding, this vocabulary to ask myself, what's the story I'm telling myself about my life?
Absolutely. I mean, I think in an ideal world where we had much more interconnection, interdependence with one another, we had places, where we could feel safe to go and just
Yeah.
allow ourselves to be ourselves without the fear of judgment or rejection, then there would be no need for therapy. I do think that it's not, you know, this that I'm coming into the space with all this wisdom
Right.
to give you to make you better. I am
Yeah.
really simply just allowing, my brain to connect with your brain and to allow you to be a witness and to help you process the
Yeah.
things that are going on by asking questions, by showing that empathy for what when somebody didn't give that to you and they should have. You
Mhm.
spoke about what I call core longings, that we all have core longings or desires. And we named 6, in the group that I work with. We have the longing for purpose, for understanding, for love, for safety, for belonging, and for significance.
Mm.
And those core longings create within us, and all of us were raised in homes that there were some deficits in those longings because there is no perfect home. Some of us,
Right.
and maybe there's one or more that is um up or has a greater deficit than another.
Mhm.
And that deficit creates a question that you bring. We've shared the work of Mike Foster in his Primal
Yeah.
Questions book. And I love that simple language. You have
Yeah.
needs. Those needs are not bad, which right there is a message that a lot of people don't get. That
Right.
my desire to be significant, I was embarrassed about that. I thought that was me being arrogant or prideful or thinking too much of myself because
Mhm.
that was the message that I got when I made attempts, when I came into places with that question Am I special? Am I
Yeah.
significant? Do you see me? Do you want to see me do this cartwheel? Do you want to see my work? And for many reasons, those were not needs that got met in the way that they should have been met. And so I carry that question into my adult life where I am, walking into rooms and I'm asking, am I safe here? Am I significant here? And if I have enough experiences of that question being answered with a no, then
Yeah.
then I'm kind of walking into those spaces with the assumption, with the bias that
Yeah.
I'm going to get a no, right? And
Yeah.
so that then the anticipation of no creates all kinds of crazy behavior that ends up getting the no, right? So
Yeah.
the coaching part of that steps in and allows the coach gets to step in and say, what do you need for that to be a yes? How do
Yeah.
you take back the power instead of, you're not that little kid that needs somebody else to say yes to that. You
Yeah.
actually get to decide, I'm significant. I'm safe. I'm secure. And I can ask for what I need and want in my relationships so that I'm getting more yeses in those
Yeah.
spaces.
Yeah.
And I
Re-
think that once we kind of take ownership of that, once we feel permission, and we do that by trialing that in relationship. And
mm,
your coach or your therapist is that safe place, hopefully, if you have a
Yeah.
good one,
Right.
where they show up without judgment, where you're safe to, reveal the crazy stories in your head that you're telling yourself, where they
Yeah.
challenge you, but challenge you with compassion,
Yeah.
understanding, hey, I know where this comes from. I've heard your story. I get why you're showing up in this way, but I wonder if there's a different way to do it. I wonder if there's a different way to get that need met. So we don't have to create, we call, there's a concept that I don't remember the original person's name that shaped this, the triangle, the villain victim
Yeah. It's
hero
the
triangle.
Dakota. Yeah. Yep.
But Brene Brown talks about in her latest book, Strong Ground, the above the line, below the line behavior. And she talked about how the line is fear. And it's the fear of whatever, the fear of embarrassment, the fear of failure, the fear of
Yep.
rejection, the fear of judgment. And when we are living in where we walk into spaces where we anticipate that that's what we're going to experience, our unhealthy response is to go below the line. And that is to either step into that rescuer. What do I have to do? That like hot fawning
Yeah.
state, right? Of what
Right.
do I have to do to, make this feeling go away? How can I fix it? And we abandon our own values at times in order to do that. Or we go into that villain place where, I'm blaming, I'm in that fight place where
Yep.
I need somebody else to be the villain because I can't possibly take
Right.
ownership for what my need is. It's your fault that I'm not getting this met, or it's
Yeah.
the system's fault, or whatever. Where we want to blame, we want to outsource that
Mm,
pain so that I don't have to feel it.
Yeah.
Or we go into the victim place where we take that on. Well, I'm helpless, I'm hopeless, I'm broken, I'm never going to change. And we kind of absorb it and we allow it to be our only option.
mm,
And I think there's an invitation to take those unhealthy responses to what does it look like to, if I'm in rescuer mode, what does it look like to, step in partnership with people? Like, in my marriage, if I have a longing or a need, rather than, you know, shape shifting my way into whatever I need to be in order to get him to meet that need. How do I come into partnership with him and be like, hey, this is, could you do this? Could we, work together in making these circumstances feel more allowable to me, feel more comfortable to me, because this is what I'm needing. How do I become more creative rather than just staying hopeless that this is never going to change? Allowing myself to step into possibility of what could be different, what might not be true. Or having, if there is unhealthy dynamics in the relationship, how do I set boundaries? How do I have courageous conversations with people, or, reorient or recalibrate the relationship to be what is helpful for what I need. So that is something I'm doing for myself on a daily basis. Like, where am I below the
Absolutely.
line on this?
Yeah.
Because we're human. We're all having a
Yeah.
human experience that has, unbearable emotions that they don't need to be unbearable. They are very uncomfortable. And I'm
Yeah.
learning to be like, I'm uncomfortable right now, but I have the tools, and I know what I need to do to be able to step into this from a posture of growth.
Yeah. Yeah. If
And
we can,
man,
if we can get
that's
to
so
that healthy place.
empowering. Yeah.
Yeah. Because a lot of people don't even get to that place. But what I like about what you're saying, on the above the line, below the line components of that, and even is one of the things we talk about in Clifton Strengths, and that we like, because it gives us, I always say, I'm always looking for handholds to understand things, meaning, I don't want to overly simplify, but I want an entry point that helps me understand a concept. And so Clifton Strengths, one of the key things that I find really useful with clients is this idea that every strength brings something and needs something. So we often say we bring and need. In fact, we'll use Gallup's Cascade program created by Richard to be able to pull this together to give clients a list of, hey, if you have these strengths. So, for example, responsibility, they bring commitment, psychological ownership, hard work. They need clarity, some autonomy, measurability.
Mhm.
Communication brings articulation and understanding in words and expression. They need an audience to share that with, so they don't do it in a vacuum. Achievers need lists to check off, but they also they bring the ability to work hard on lists. They need autonomy, timelines, specifics, measures. Those
Mhm.
are strengths bringing needs. And what can be interesting, I've often said it, is that if you think about your top 5 and what's dominant for you, every one of them has a need. Every one of them has a strength. Everyone has a need. And if one's not getting met, the need doesn't go away. It just
Mhm.
almost multiplies the need of the others. Till before you know it, you're cascading and you're getting overly demanding. And I think a lot about, even as we think, back to your 6 core needs of like being significant, loved, accepted, and whatever. There's all kinds of great frameworks around
Right.
our, loved and accepted, and, all these different elements that you can find different tools that give you frameworks around emotional needs we have to be thriving and healthy. What's
Right.
interesting though is I feel like when I hear you describe, if we come in thinking we're at a deficit, I know there's places where I would add communication. Communication is my dominant themes, obviously. Not surprising. So is positivity, and so is woo. Woo stands for winning others over. So I love to hear that you like me and I've won you.
Mhm.
And so I would get over attached with people or be too excited about somebody who would give me affirmation when I was younger or before the age of 20. I would get very excited about affirmation and encouragement and things like that,
Mhm.
because I realize in my head, I see this vision in my head of, to your point of the needs of, I have a need to be excited about, to be affirmed and loved and told I'm significant. And I'm driving down the road going, well, my affirmation tank's getting low. And I see a sign on the highway that says, next stop for gas, 72 miles. You better pull over now. And so I treat people like they're my last stop for gas. Like I treat
Yeah.
every interaction like, oh, I've got to get it now because what if it doesn't come again? Oh,
Right.
do I really have enough clarity? Do I really have enough information? Do I really have enough affirmation? Do I really have enough? And we start to treat each other as if like, oh, last stop for gas. It's the
Yeah.
last. And I don't think
Right.
people realize how much we do that in our strengths, which is just the ways our brain organizes information and wants to execute, but also in our emotional needs that have grown out of surviving our childhoods.
Yes. I recently just listened to a video of you actually talking about the house that has the foundation, like the four
Yeah,
pillars or the four corners, right? And that when one of those gets removed, the pressure gets put on the other three. And, if two of those get removed, if two of those strengths that you have are, not being allowed to be, expressed, or the
yeah,
need of it isn't being met, then the pressure goes on. So, oh man, I got to over communicate. I got to over,
yeah,
woo people into, in order to make up for the deficit of the other three. I think that's a great concept. And
yeah,
the other thing that I love about strengths too is like, and I think about you in particular, like with woo, having that need to be affirmed and to feel like people see me, I'm significant to people, they like me. That's the gift you bring to rooms that you walk into. So
yeah,
it is, that need really is information of like, oh man, this is what I was built to give. And when
yeah,
we become more self-protected or fearful or live in that like scarcity that I'm not
yeah,
getting enough of it, so then we shut down, our giving of that thing. And then that's when we kind of get stuck in places where it really is the strength of that is this is the gift I bring. And I
yeah,
need to focus on that. And in doing that, I often get that back in return. But if
yeah,
I'm living in, I'm that people don't like me, if I have the anticipation of rejection and I'm orienting my behavior around my fear of, the trying to avoid that feeling, then I'm not doing what I was created to
yeah,
do.
yeah.
So I love that bringing together of, man, the thing you need is also the thing that you are meant to be releasing into the rooms that you're in.
When I first got into Clifton Strengths, the popular book at the time, especially in like faith circles, was The Five Love Languages,
Mm,
right? Which was an old, I think Gary Smalley book in the old days or
yeah,
whatever,
that
whatever.
goes way
But one
back.
of the
Yeah.
elements that came out, one of the elements that came out of that was always very interesting to me is the thing you gave is often the thing you wanted. And I was like, remember thinking about that as I dove more into Clifton Strengths work over the years. And I realized how basically what you just said, how true that is that
Mhm.
most of us don't realize that if my default way of showing love to you, I'm dominant executing themes. If my default way of showing love to you is using achiever responsibility to keep my promises and deliver, guess what? There's nothing I want more out of a partner than someone who keeps promises and delivers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If my default way of going, gosh, I want you to know how genius you are, Destry. I'm going to use my woo positivity communication for me to tell you what I see, how it impacts the world, and how it makes us all better. There's nothing you want more than to get that back. And I think there's times where our fear and ego won't admit that that's what we want. I think
Yeah.
that's the power again of vocabulary, either
Yeah.
through frameworks of coaching and healing, and I mean, it's therapy and therapeutic coaching and healing and psychology and psychiatry
Mhm.
and Clifton Strengths and neurology is that it doesn't take out the work, but it gives you language to go, wait, I need this. I need something in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. When I remember when I first Clifton Strengths we know are developed in dominant ways of thinking. Are developed over timelines in our life, like birth to 10 and 15 to 22, all these seasons before the
Mhm.
prefrontal cortex of our brain kind of fuses the rest of our brain. And I remember saying this
Mhm.
one time in front of a room full of people and saying, yeah, I mean, a lot of times because you can see how your strengths developed. And so I used to do a party trick where I would do a crowd of 1,000 for a weekend workshop or something. And I'd be like, I'd find an includer on the list and I would be like, includers, raise your hand. And I'd pick them out of the audience. I'd be like, real quick, did you move around a lot as kids or are you the only sister with all the brothers or one brother without sisters or whatever? And they're like, oh, and I would almost get it right. One time I got it really right in front of a group and she's like, I moved 15 times in her entire course of school from kindergarten to
Yeah.
high school because her dad was a traveling superintendent. he'd go from school to school across Ohio to fire people, and then he moved on. And that separated it out. And so that's the includer part. And I remember somebody came up to me after the break, after the fight. Like, I'm like, how did you know that? I'm like, well, includer comes from somebody who moved. You had to be the new kid. You learned how to navigate into groups, and you probably have a talent for that now as adults. And so amazing. And trying to affirm it. I had a number of people who were very mad at me because they said, so you're telling me my Clifton strengths are simply a product of my dysfunction, and I'm screwing up my kid right now. And I remember trying to hold that tension at the time. I don't know how well I responded then. I know how I responded now. But the idea for me now is I'm going, actually, my strengths, as well as values and all the other things that come in my story, all those needs I'm talking about, they were the tools that allowed me to survive that first 22 years of my life. And I don't regret them at all. I look at them with great love and admiration now. The trick is to realize I'm not living in Patton, Maine in my parents' house anymore. I'm not living at my university. I'm not living. And those tools, while custom made for a little kid in a town of 800 people in the woods, or in a small university, in this place doing this job, like, that's not where I live. And I cannot use my tools of Clifton strengths or my even psychological understanding of how the world works and the assumptions of how the world works to navigate a life that's not lived in that place anymore. And that was a big shift for me in recognizing and actually making peace with the tools and values and perspectives that I had now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that goes back to a much deeper conversation that I'm not, you know, uh, educated enough to totally get into, but it's the nature nurture question, right? Like, how
Right.
much of our way of being is shaped by experiences versus how much are these things just, endowed into us through generations, like what all that kind of stuff. But regardless, and I think this goes back to the power of naming the experience. Like, a lot of people, when I start to kind of ask them, questions about their childhood, a very quick answer, to people who are resistant to that are like, look, I don't want to blame my mommy and daddy for all my problems. My parents
Yeah.
did the best they could. And
Therapists want to blame
while
their
I'm like,
parents.
they did do the best they could. They did what they could do with what they were
Yeah.
given. I mean, we can just follow this back, right? We without any sort of intervention of growing or doing anything different, we we do what we were taught to
Best they
do.
can do.
So it's not to put blame on, and let me be clear too. There is clear, there are people out there that made really horrible choices and did horrible things, and we were impacted by those. So I'm not saying that they're absolved of
No
blame
minimization going
or
on.
responsibility, but it isn't simply to go back and figure out who's to blame for what we're doing, but the power of being able to go and actually address, oh, these were the dynamics in my home. This was how things got set up in my brain. How do I use that information not to just, there is a season where we have to turn compassionately to that part of us and allow ourselves to grieve the losses of those experiences. But
Yeah.
at the same time, we can't stay stuck there. We do have to move forward towards, now that I'm not stuck in that home. I'm not, stuck in that helpless place where I have no resources or tools. I now know how to reach for things that I have that can help me grow and become better, and hopefully
Yeah.
give my kids, my kids are going to turn back and be like, these are the places that my mom messed up. And I
Yeah.
hope I can be strong enough and confident enough to receive their critique without shame and be like, you're
Yeah.
right. I missed that and I want you to do better. And that will help them grow and become better. So the goal, like you said, going back to the beginning, it's not perfection. We aren't
Yeah.
going to get to that place of where all of a sudden we're no longer, I mean, I feel like I grow in certain areas and then other areas get exposed. And I think the empowered part of it is that I don't move into helplessness. I can go, wait, I know how to reach for connection. I know how to reach for,
Yeah.
somebody to sit with me and hear my story and be a witness to my grief. I know how to, you know, lean into community to help facilitate courage
Yeah.
to step into uncomfortable places to become, better than what that, and not stay stuck in that old story, that old narrative.
Yeah. We often say Clifton's strengths themes are morally neutral. There are no good strengths, there are no bad strengths. I tell people all the time, think of them as tools being wielded by your surgeon to help heal you or sew you back together. You want that surgeon healthy as possible. I think you want that surgeon emotionally calm. You want that surgeon focused. You want that surgeon to be healthy. And I think for us at the Dauphinee Group, at least, the deep work of either therapeutic coaching or therapists or psychologists, deep work on our values, our fears, our stories, and our filters and things like that are critical for a healthy person wielding it. And so back to our conversation, one, I think understanding our past makes it more effective for us to move forward, which is why we believe in therapy and unpacking that. Another big one too, I feel like out of our conversation is this idea of vocabulary. If nothing else, find tools or even videos or therapists to help you with the words to describe specifically the needs that come with our emotional needs and our developmental needs, as well as our strengths needs. Vocabulary ends up being a big piece. But in one last thing, Des, as we get going, but if somebody's going like, Mike, this is fine, great conversation, yay, but like, I wouldn't even know how to start. Or I've never really had therapy. I've never stepped into those places. I've never done the work on I'm ready to ask myself about the story that I've been living and how that affects where I'm going. Any thoughts on like easy on ramps or basic ways they can get going to ask themselves that looking backward question?
Yeah, I love kind of what you're putting out there is that it starts with curiosity, right? Like
Mm.
we have to move away from the judgment of our story, the judgment of our feelings, and move into a space where we become curious and where we start to recognize patterns in our life, emotions in our life that are giving us information and become curious about them and then finding that right fit. And, I think that there are so many different ways to go about getting a coach or
Mhm.
getting a counselor,
Yeah.
a therapist, but I think it's important to be open to finding what the right fit is.
Yeah.
It's not a one size fits all. When I start with somebody, I'm always like, listen, we're going to start this conversation. And it's okay if at some point you feel like, hey, your style or your way of being isn't connecting with mine. Don't give up on that. Don't just write
Yeah.
off therapy or write off coaching. Explore, go more um into areas. I think, I mean, I am a personal fan of the Dauphinee Group and the way that we do coaching. I always tell people, coaching isn't just about setting a goal, right? It is helping people um, create a vision for their life, but we want people to like who they are, be proud of who they are, and who they have become on the way to that vision.
Yeah.
That
Yeah. I really
journey
know.
is more important than actually ever even getting to the destination, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody said you spend more time on the side of the mountain than you do on the top. And I love that diagram as a hiker. I do spend more time on the side of the mountain. Takes me a
Sure.
long time to get up there. And so how are we allowing that journey to shape us? And so I'm going to encourage people and be a fan of coaches or counselors that really value both journeys. The
Yeah.
one
Not just
of,
forward, but they're willing to they're willing to let the past story impact the future that you're creating.
Absolutely. Yeah. And who are willing to step into that curiosity with you and
Mhm.
ask really, helpful questions that allow you and that create a safe space.
Mhm.
I'm not here to tell people what to do. That's not even as a job
Sure.
as a coach, I shouldn't be
Yeah.
telling people what to do. What I should be doing is asking the questions that allow people to be open to curiosity, to be
Yeah.
open to possibility.
Yeah.
And when there is that block, like going back to you saying, I see a black wall, when
Mhm.
there is that place of, man, I can't seem to push through to the next level. How do I
Yeah.
pause and pay attention to what's going on in me that is part of that hesitation, that is part of that roadblock? And if whoever you find, whether it's a therapist or a coach, if find somebody who's willing to ask those kinds of questions
Yeah.
for you.
I think you're right. And I think, for those of you listening along or watching along at home, I think it's this idea of start with curiosity and then start to ask questions about it. Start to step in to finding people that are like, oh, that's a different way of thinking. I hadn't thought about that. Podcast videos, better help is an online one. I know some people use some of that. But even finding therapy in other places, you'll be shocked how many people can actually make references for you. And even the Dauphinee Group, we actually do therapeutic coaching. We have coaches in our system, and we do a form of coaching in general that asks deeper questions. If you're interested in that, follow up here. But I think, it's actually more accessible than people realize. There's a lot more resources out there. I'll do a whole separate video. We'll do a whole separate recording sometime on um, AI, large language model coaching, and not chatbots and the rest. That's a different conversation. Um, but I think people can find. But I think the key is, instead of judging your past, start with being
Mhm.
curious about what the story is about your past and what that story means for your future. I think that's the headline we kind of wrap with.
One thing I want to add to that is, and this goes back to what you said about community. At
Mm.
Healing Care, which is another organization that I work with, we do intensive group retreats where people come in, they're strangers, they don't know one another, they're coming into this space and they're walking through 7 to 8 days of, you know, teaching, small group, coming together as a small group, as well as meeting one on one with a counselor. The beautiful part of that experience, and most people are like, hell no,
Freak
I would
out.
never do
Hello.
that.
Yeah.
Mike's already twitching, like, nope, nope,
I'm
nope,
like,
not
no.
gonna do. But here's one of the things that I learned out of, doing that for the past 20 years, leading those retreats, is that when people come together and they have kind of a structure to help them facilitate um, group conversations and the magic of realizing that, when people finally have the courage to be vulnerable and share their story
Yeah.
or share some of the things that they're wrestling with or thinking about, and they realize, oh, I'm not the only one who
I'm not
thinks
alone.
that. I'm not
Yeah.
the only one who's sitting with that story
Right.
inside of me that's so terrified to have it exposed.
Yeah.
That is where the magic of healing in
Mhm.
the context of community happens, where we get to practice vulnerability. And I don't think that healing can happen without
Yeah.
vulnerability. And so
In that
it
relationship.
may start one on one, but there
Yeah.
is power in finding places, communities, whether that's AA, whether
Sure.
that is, your church small group or your coffee,
Mhm.
connection group in the morning, your mom group, whatever it is, bringing these conversations that expose, that
Yeah.
communicate from the level of feelings and
Good.
kind of some of those identity beliefs that we have, and realizing, oh, I'm not the only one. And
Yeah.
that's a tremendous healing that can happen.
So good. It's all about, when it comes to navigating off the map, we often we're gonna have feelings as the world. A lot of us right now are having feelings about
Mhm.
uncertainty. We're having feelings about everything from politics to what the future could mean, the job market. We're losing the ability to kind of guess at what tomorrow looks like. That creates a lot of
Mhm.
anxiety for people. And so even when I can say, hey, know your strengths and set a compass, you're going to feel better if you're feeling understanding how the person holding the compass, that integrated part of you, honors your story, but also honors where you're going. And you can have that conversation about that together. So it's important for us in the Dauphinee Group. We start here. So really excited to have this conversation, Destry, with you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Won't be our last time. If you're following along, I was super excited. I discovered last week, Spotify sent me a ping that we had 50 whole subscribers. We've had more than 1,000 downloads, but we had 50 whole subscribers. Honestly, it means a ton to us. In fact, we need reviews and subscribers to be more promoted on things. And so you need at least a certain number of 7 or more, actually 15 or more, somebody said, reviews in order to be a reviewed podcast and things like that. So if you are enjoying this conversation, please, and you want to help us reach other people, give us a like, give us a follow, a share, all those things. If this conversation today has brought something up for you, I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to have us talk more about this, we'll have it come back on different episodes. But Destry, always appreciate getting to have this. Thank you so much. I look forward to doing it again.
So great. Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. See you next time.